Moving on to the web view version of an app. Now, cross-platform apps, to me, Xamarin is the king of sort of these platforms. That's my opinion because I've used a lot of these other hybrid app frameworks, and most of them are based on HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS. That's a fancy way of saying an app is effectively a web browser, and then the app itself is contained in the web code within that browser. There are a couple of frameworks that are fairly well known. One is Ionic, and the other is a completely free one called the Intel XDK, which used to be known as PhoneGap. So if you're rapidly prototyping an app, one of the options you can use in Xamarin is similar to Ionic and XDK. You can hit New Solution and click Web View App. Now, in a weird kind of way, this Web View app is a hybrid of a hybrid. You can use HTML and JavaScript and CSS inside of Xamarin for this, but you can also use C# to access the underlying parts of the app ecosystem or the phone ecosystem. So let's hit next and see what this WebView app is all about. Let's have WebView, and I'm just going to write delete so I know to delete this later. Let's go ahead and create it. Now we have, again, a main storyboard inside of this app. Let's see what's contained in here. And I suspect, based on the text at the side, we're going to have a WebView controller, which I will just open as well so it's ready to look at. So come on, Xamarin, main storyboard, and there, just as I predicted, we have a web view. This is a special web view controller, so this holds the web view. Let me just make sure that I've got that set in there again. Okay, so we have a web view controller as the only screen of our app. And that's because it's the base of our app. It's the item we're going to use to show everything, to navigate, and do things like pushing, or in this case, it would be a fake pushing of a new controller on top. Why do I say fake? Because whenever we use these HTML JavaScript frameworks, even in Xamarin, we're emulating how the iPhone navigates, does its animations, and bits and pieces like that. And to me, that never feels quite right. It's like buying a knockoff Rolex. You can tell it's not a Rolex. Or it's like buying a cheap Chinese version that's trying to copy a Volkswagen. You can tell it's not quite right. With that said, I'll just run through this WebView controller very quickly. We have our viewDidLoad method, and inside of here we have some special commands to intercept URLs loading, and that allows us to handle native calls from the browser. That method is contained down here, and I'm not going to bore you with details of it because I think that is going to cover perhaps 1% of you out there. But if you want to know more about this system, this is called the Razor WebView system. And if you head over to developer.xamarin.com, under the advanced section, they have building HTML views using Razor templates. And they talk you through everything that you need to do, including using web views programmatically. I would say to you that seeing as you're taking the time to learn Xamarin, just do your templating in Xamarin itself. Don't rely on these web views. I think it's a bit of a duff feature, and it's just something that's there so Xamarin can say, me too. Alright, that completes the WebView app part of this section. Congratulations, you finished this section on layout types in Xamarin.ios. You've learnt how to create a single view, which you kind of already knew. You've also learnt what a master detail view is, and how it behaves differently on smaller screen devices like the iPhone versus larger screens such as the iPad. Then we looked at tabbed applications, an example of which is in the picture you currently see, and this is a very iPhone-like layout. You wouldn't necessarily encounter this on Android in case you're thinking of using it there. Then we looked at page-based apps, and a great example of which is the Kindle app, and this emulates the real feel of a magazine and the page-turning effect. Finally, I very briefly covered the web view in Xamarin, which I find to be a bit of a redundant feature. But it's up to you. If you are much more comfortable with HTML and JavaScript, then please do look at the Razor web interface engine that Xamarin has implemented. I believe all of the Razor source code is actually on GitHub, so you can find it there. Okay, now that we've gone through these, my final parting advice to you is, if you want a quick and dirty app, then follow one of these basic layouts from 1 to 4. If you want to be a bit different, that's fine too. You don't have to follow these layouts, but these layouts are very familiar to iPhone users, so you won't have any rejection of your app because people don't understand where they are. So if you're going to go down the custom layout route, make sure it's very, very understandable and ask a lot of people to test it and see if they understand where they are inside of your app's navigation. Welcome to this section on layout types in Xamarin iOS. There are quite a few to cover, the first of which we've already covered in some way, and that's the single view app. We only have one view on our screen. Then we'll look at master detail, and you've probably come across this if you've used an iPad where you have something like the Gmail app, and on one side you have a scrolling list of your emails. On the opposite side you have the detail when you click in that scrolling list. We'll also discover how master detail works inside of smaller screens like the iPhone. Then we'll look at a tabbed app, one of which is shown in the iPhone 4S on the right here. It is a bunch of tabs that sit at the bottom that allow you to open up a new view every time you click one. Then we'll look at a page-based app, and a good example of this is the Kindle app. It provides a nice page-turning animation that makes you think you are using a real book or magazine. Finally, we'll cover the WebView app, which is only available in Xamarin.iOS, and this is sort of a hybrid of a hybrid, if you will. It allows you to use HTML and JavaScript inside of the C# environment. Now, with all of these, I'm only going to cover them very briefly, and I'm not going to go deeply into how they are used. I'm going to give you a few tips on where you should use these kind of things, but I don't want to bore you with going too deep into code before we have to. I would rather go deeper into the code later on in this course when we're actually building apps, because I feel it's a much better way and much faster way for you to learn. So let's begin looking at layout types in Xamarin. Open up Xamarin Studio and let's create a single view app. This is something that we've done over and over again in this course, so this is going to be a very brief lecture with a couple of pointers for you. Hit App, Single View App, give it a dummy name, and go ahead. I'm going to just turn off Git and create. Now, we've sort of covered this implicitly, exactly what a single view app is, but as the name suggests, we only have one view. Inside of our main.storyboard, we have a single view controller. Now, if you start by making an app that has a single view, you are not constrained to that single view. You can expand the concept to have tabs, web views, and the various app layouts that I'm going to cover in subsequent lectures. So I would advise you, when you're starting to make an app, start simple. Start with a single view controller if you can, because that helps organize your mind And then later on, when you want to expand your app, go ahead and add more elements into it, or change it to a tabbed app or something similar. Now, a single view app has a single view controller and an entry point, which is on the left-hand side here with the arrow. That means it's the only thing that gets fired up when your app starts. If I wanted to create another view controller, let's drag one in from our toolbox, pop it in there, and you'll notice this doesn't have the arrow. So this would be a separate view controller. You might give it a name, you might give it a class, and you would give it some kind of storyboard ID. So this would be my view controller ID string of some sort. And then what you could do inside of your code to load up that view controller is reference this storyboard ID and go ahead and instantiate it, push it on top, show it modally, various things like that. Don't worry about pushing and modal showing for now. I'm going to show you that later on in this course. If I wanted to change to this view controller at the bottom right as my first view controller, I would scroll down in the properties and hit Is Initial View Controller. And you'll notice that little arrow icon switches to the bottom right. So this one will be shown first. Of course, if I click the previous one, you'll notice its class is View Controller, and the new one has no class. So we don't have anywhere to write our code. And what we can simply do is click the class down in the Properties section and select View Controller if we wanted. And that would mean that our viewcontroller.cs file is now applicable to both of these view controllers. So they're essentially copies of each other, but only one of them can be the initial view controller. Okay, that's it for this lecture. It's just to get you familiar with a single view controller app and what the storyboard ID does, and also where we enter our storyboard when the app is first loaded. Let's move on to the master detail app type. Typically, if you use Gmail, you've seen this on your iPhone Gmail account or your iPad. One half of the screen is occupied, or one third rather, is occupied by a list of your emails. And then the right-hand side shows you some of those details whenever you select an email. So this is known as a master detail view. And iPhone or iPad can adjust what it does with the master detail depending on the screen size. So if you're running this app on an iPhone, you wouldn't have this side-by-side view. You'd have a list. When you clicked it, it would push a new view on top of that list so you could read the email. So in Xamarin, let's create one. New solution, master detail app. And you can read there, this template creates a master detail app. It offers a user interface to display a list and then uses a nav controller and split view on iPad. And that's the technical name for that kind of view. It's a split view. Right, let's call this something like dummy2 and go ahead and create it. So far, we've worked with storyboards that are quite simple. For example, in our single view app. And you're about to see in a second what this storyboard in particular looks like. It's fairly complicated, but I'll walk you through it. Let's open up our main storyboard and then zoom out a little so we can see everything. And as you can see, we've got a mishmash of lots of different things happening here. First of all, we have a split view controller over on the left-hand side. And this inherits from the class UI split view controller. And this is the controller that orchestrates everything that's going on in this scene. That controller needs what's called a master view. So if we head over to this navigation controller where my cursor is, and then next to it we have another view controller. Now the reason for having a navigation controller is this is the unseen orchestrator of what happens inside of the master view controller. So if you select something in the master and you want to overlay a screen on it, the navigation controller is what takes care of that. So we have our master view controller here, and inside of Xamarin's default app, when you create this, this is going to show a list of dates and times. When you select one of those items, it's then going to show you a detail view controller, which is this one at the bottom right. And the detail view controller also has a navigation controller sitting underneath it, and that's in case you have something inside of the detail view controller that you want to select and then push another page on top of it. So we have this master detail relationship, and how does the split view controller know which is which? Well, the first one coming out of it has an index of 0, and the split view controller will assume that this is the master. If we click on the actual master view controller, you'll see its class is master view controller. Then the second one that comes out of this split view controller is this detail view controller at the bottom right. And when you click it, you'll notice its class is detail view controller. So of course the master needs to know about the detail. And how does it know that? Well, let's open up the master view controller.cs. Inside here you'll see we have the detail view controller set as a public variable. And if we scroll down, this line in particular inside of view.didLoad says detail view controller is equal to, and I'll just scroll across, a detail view controller which comes from the navigation controller, split view controller, and then you can access the controllers coming out of that split view by using an index. So the detail is 1 and the master will be 0. So that's how we define the detail view controller from the master section. Also of note, inside of the master view controller constructor, we have this little section that says if the current device is equal to a pad, so iPad or iPad Pro, iPad Mini, and I believe in some cases this might also allow you to have the 6 Plus, but I'm not sure about that, so I'd advise you to check on that. So if this is an iPad, it requests that our content size is 320 wide by 600 high. But this is a preferred content size, so it's not set in stone necessarily, and it gives the system some freedom or some flexibility to move things around a little bit. Okay, that's enough talking from me as to what these things are. Let's run this on our iPhone 5. And you will notice we have the master view controller that pops up. We don't have that view that we had on the iPad. Let's see what happens if we do hardware rotate left. We still have the master. So on the phone, you'll only get one screen. Let's hit plus, and by default, Xamarin adds a list of dates and times to our list. Then if we click one, it opens up a detail view controller and tells us the time. So inside of the code, let's look at exactly what that's doing. The master view controller is running. We have a view.didLoad. The view.didLoad adds an add button. And that's the button at the top right that I was clicking. Every time something is added with that add button, we have an add new item method that inserts something into the table view. Now, of course, we have a table source, which you should be familiar with by now, that takes care of that table. We have our classic cell identifier, data source, etc. Now, if I scroll down, I'm looking for a particular section, and that is row selected. So when we select an item, it says if the current device is an iPad, then we can set the detail view controller with our items. And let's see what that looks like inside of our detail view controller. We have our set detail item method, which compares the detail item that it currently has to the one passed in. And if they're different, then it's going to update the view or configure it. And in our case, it simply puts a label that has the date and time. So that's a very simple view controller that is pushed onto our split view controller on the right hand side. So you've seen what this looks like in an iPhone. I'll stop it running there. Let's run this on the iPad Air 2. So if it's too big for your screen when it runs the simulator, hit Window, Scale, 50, and perhaps even smaller for this one. Let's try 25. You can use command numbers as shortcuts for the scales of your devices. Right, so let's open up our master. And if I select an item, you'll see that the detail section changes accordingly. Now, if I tap in the detail section, the default behavior is that the master goes away. I can either hit this icon at the top to show the master, or I can swipe in from the side to show the master. It's kind of tricky to do on the simulator. You have to get very close to the left side to do it. Or I can swipe to the left to get rid of it. Okay, let me stop that running. That is the basics of the master detail view controller, and it's a very handy pattern to have if you're running on an iPad, because you can explicitly tell your users this is designed for iPad. And if you're into App Store optimization, any user that has an iPad is obviously going to prioritize an app that has this design pattern over one that's just designed for a phone. Let's discuss tabbed apps. The tabbed app in iOS is a design classic. Everyone recognizes an app that has this list of icons at the bottom, and when you click it, it changes the current view controller. Now, here's a word of warning. If you are designing for Android, this is a bad design pattern. Why? Because in Android, you have your back, home, and sort of option buttons or task switcher below these tabbed things, and having buttons that close to each other is simply bad user experience because they could tap the wrong one. So don't do this in Android. That's just a side note. Right. So let's look at the basics of a tabbed app by actually opening up a new solution in Xamarin and clicking Tabbed App. Chances are you're going to use a tabbed app quite often in your development career, more so than most of the others. Hit Next. Let's have Dummy 3. And I've spelt it wrong, but it doesn't matter. Let's go ahead and create it. Then open up our storyboard as usual. Zoom out. The first thing you'll notice, our entry point is this thing called a tab bar controller. And this inherits from the class of UI tab bar controller. Then this item allows you to spawn various numbers of tabs. So every time you drag in a new view controller, it spawns a new tab for you. So we have a first view up at the top, and at the bottom we have a second view. And it appears Xamarin has a slight bug here in its display. The tab bar controller on the left is only showing one tab bar, but nonetheless, let's carry on. We're going to add another tab to this. Let's scroll down in our toolbox, grab a view controller and drag it in. Now that we have that, what we can do is hold down Control, click in tab bar and drag it over to the new view controller and release. It'll ask you for a relationship, and because we're dragging from a tab bar controller, we can have another tab. So when you hit tab, it'll wire everything up for us. So let me just zoom in on this tab bar controller, and now we've had the second one actually appear on this. So the bug has gone away by itself, which is very handy. So we now have a first view, a second view, and a third view. Let's go ahead and run this in our iPhone 5, and this should behave exactly as you might be expecting. So we have our first view. When we click our tab, we have a second and the third one. And these all work as you expect. Right, stop that running. And I'm going to give you a gotcha for beginners to iOS. Inside of here, we have a view controller. Let's say you're on the first page. Then you click something in the first page that you want to read details on. But you cannot present a view controller on top of this first view without an underlying navigation controller. So if I just delete actually this third one, so just select it and hit backspace, scroll up in your toolbox and drag in a nav controller. And there's not much space to work with here, so I'll just zoom out. We now have an attached view controller to a navigation controller. Then what we should do is control click and drag from the tab controller to the nav controller and select tab. So now we have a navigation controller that allows us to further put view controllers on top of this one. And that's a good design pattern. It helps your user know where they are from the tab section, and then if they navigate away within that tab, up at the top there'll be a back button allowing them to go back within that tab. So it's quite an intuitive way of thinking about things and navigating. Now, where would you use one of these tab controllers? Well, you'd use it where you have an app that a user accesses things quite often. So if you had a music app, you would have something like a tab for favorites, a tab for new, a tab for messages if you had messaging in the app. And these would be three things that you'd expect the user to use quite often. So you don't want them clicking a menu, going to messages, because it's a long-winded way of doing things, and a tab is a nice shortcut. The downside of a tab controller is that you lose a bit of screen real estate at the bottom. And if you have a navigation controller, you also lose some screen real estate at the top where you have your nav bar. Nowadays, with the larger screens of the iPhone 5, 6, etc., it's not such a problem. In the days of iPhone 4 and 4S, it was a problem, because if you then added a banner ad into this, you leave yourself with very little room to actually show content. So just be aware of that. that concludes how to make a tabbed app in Xamarin and some of the navigation controller gotchas, and also how to add a new tab to your controller. What if you want to make an app that is effectively a book, or you want to give the user a feeling of a magazine experience? Well, there's an app layout for that, and it's the page-based app. Every time you swipe the screen, we get a nice little page animation of moving to the next screen. Let's create one in Xamarin. Hit New Solution, Page-based app. Hit Next. I'll call this Dummy 4. And wait for it to be created. Open up main.storyboard. Whilst that's opening, I just want to talk about all of these items on the left-hand menu. As you get more and more familiar with iOS, you're going to start to notice what stands out when you create a new project. So we have Data View Controller that stands out, we have Model Controller, and we have Root View Controller that stands out. And between all of the different app types that we have played with, you'll notice that these are a little bit different. These are by no means set. You can change these names to anything you like, but the design patterns are more or less set in stone. Okay, this is our main storyboard. And first things first, we have this Root View Controller that has a rather lovely brown background. If we zoom out, there is one more view controller called a Data View Controller on the right hand side. And if I go over to the Properties Inspector and I just remove this Data View Controller, you'll notice it has a class of Data View Controller. So I'll just put that one back in there. So how is this controller connected to the Data View Controller? Well, the first place to look is at the Root View Controller, because this is the first entry into our application. So let's open it up. Let me make a little bit of space. And up at the top, we have a couple of class level variables. One is a model controller, and one is a page view controller. Now, if we scroll down, inside of our view did load, the page view controller is instantiated. And this takes the standard page view controller, gives it a transition style. So this is the curling page effect. We have other ones like scroll. We can set some orientations for navigation. So a horizontal one is like a magazine scrolling. And wherever the spine of the magazine is. And we can have this maximum, we can have it at mid, so split the screen in half, or minimum like it was. Right, then we're defining a starting view controller. And this goes to this model controller class. So let's open up that model controller class. And then it requests a view controller. So get view controller is here. And this grabs our data view controller from our storyboard and populates it with some data. And I'll just talk a bit here about how you grab something from a storyboard. First, you cast it to the type that it is. Then you grab the storyboard and you instantiate it by its ID. So if I just remove this bracket, it asks for the identifier. And of course, inside of storyboard, if I click my data view controller, there is my storyboard ID. And that's a common error that happens to a lot of people, is they forget to set this ID, they try to access it later on, and we get a crash. Okay, inside of our root view controller, let's keep going down this list. We have a starting view controller that grabs our view controller from the storyboard. Then it sets an array of view controllers with only our starting view controller in it, then it sets our page view controller with our set view controllers. So this gives us an array of these view controllers that are effectively the pages of our magazine. Then the most important part here is we add this subview of our page view controller into our view. Now let me just hit play on our iPhone 5 because there's a lot going on here, and I apologize if it's not quite clear, but when we see it actually running, it will become a lot clearer. So we have our background view, and then it's loading this page view controller on top of that, and then inside of the page view controller we have these data views. So these data views, I can scroll and swipe them across like so. And you'll notice the month is changing at the top. So there's a little hierarchy going on in here. The root view controller to the page view controller to the actual data view controller. And at first glance, this isn't obvious when you just open up your main storyboard. Okay, that covers the basic page view controller. And it's quite an uncommon sort of controller. It's pretty rare that you will use it as a developer, but I've covered it here in short, so you have a good understanding of what it is.